She wasn't found where the aristocracy was. That's not where she was. She needed to be recognized and her story needed to be told. And particularly the fact that she is really the founding mother of what is now Georgia College, State University, because without her voice, it wouldn't have happened.
Julia Ann Flisch was born in the first year of the Civil War to immigrant parents. But she was not a typical daughter of the Old South.
Her mother was from Germany and her father was from Switzerland. They met in Richmond, Virginia. Both had just immigrated here and then moved to Augusta after they married and opened a confectionery, is what they called them at the time. After her birth, they moved to Athens for Julia's health.
So that's where her earliest years were, growing up in the shadow of UGA. She was so bright that they ended up sending her to this school called the Lucy Cobb Institute. And most of the young women there, they were well-to-do. So in going there, she met a lot of women, including Susan Atkinson, who had connections.
After graduating with honors from the Lucy Cobb Institute, she promptly applied to the university and was just as promptly refused because she was a woman.
I think this gives you a sense of her confidence in herself because she knew how bright she was. That I'll be the first exception, I'll be the first woman admitted to UJ. Well, she wasn't, they turned her down.
She never talked about it. But in a handwritten memoir that I've discovered, she said that at one time she had been very bitter, but that she had gotten over that, but that her drive for education, she so wanted education.
She went to Augusta, which really kind of became her main town. And she got work with the Augusta Chronicle, more or less as a journalist. And she did articles and reporting for them.
In 1882, and here she's 21 years old, she wrote a letter to the Augusta Chronicle, and her sort of byword, and they use it as the headline, was "Give the Girls a Chance."
That basically said, we need this institution and we need it now. And while I can't say whether or not that influenced legislators to pass the act that founded Georgia Normal and Industrial College, it definitely was a major influence across the state for building support for the institution that became Georgia College.
The South, we're trying to recover from the Civil War. We need everybody's input. Everybody needs opportunities. There's so many women who are without husbands or whose husbands came home unable to work.
When the Georgia Normal and Industrial College at Milledgeville, later Georgia State College for Women and now Georgia College and State University, was dedicated in 1891, Julia Flisch was the only woman on the speaker's platform.
She was in the forefront, petitioning for education for women. Mrs. Atkinson was the one who actually receives all the credit because her husband was a legislator, but Julia Flisch was right in there.
She had delivered the address at the laying of the cornerstone for the college. And this was a tremendous big deal. I write about it, use quotes about it, because it's hard for us to even imagine, because there were 7,000 participants in the parade. Special trains came down from Atlanta. The whole legislature came down from Atlanta, because it was a really big deal to have a state-supported industrial college for women.
You always have to get the right ear of the right person to make a difference, and obviously she did. So she was very influential in that regard.
Julia Flisch first took a job teaching stenography and typing at the new college, and later was able to teach her favorite subject, history.
When Dr. Chappell, J. Harris Chappell, started the college, she was one of the first people that became a part of the institution. What's really great about Julia, she was actually not only one of our first faculty members, but one of our first advocates.
So by 1891, it was open for business, and most of the degrees were two-year degrees. Most of the girls who went here ended up becoming teachers, but they had different tracks. And the young women here just were enthralled by her. I mean, she was tough, but she really cared about them.
When Dr. Chappell left, a new president came, Dr. Parks, and his ideas about education were very different. His ideas were that a woman should be educated, but only for the benefit of her family and society, not for her own personal enlightenment.
And so she elected to leave in 1906. She went to the University of Wisconsin, where she got a bachelor's and master's, things she couldn't do in Georgia. She worked with leading historians at the University of Wisconsin, which was kind of the center of American history at the day.
But she came back then to teach in Augusta at Tubman Academy, and Tubman was for women only.
When the state's first junior college opened in Augusta, she became the Dean of Women and Senior Professor of History. In 1899, she was awarded an honorary degree by the University of Georgia, which had refused to admit her 20 years earlier.
She was one of the founders of Augusta Junior College, and she taught there for the rest of her career. Was a strong advocate for women's suffrage, which isn't surprising. And then even in the 30s, as an older woman, she was campaigning for equal pay for women in colleges and universities, which made her unpopular, of course. By the late 30s, her eyesight was failing and she had to retire, and she died in 1941. And she's buried in Magnolia Cemetery in Augusta, in a very modest grave with her family.
One thing that was really fascinating is that the students, and it was probably because of her demeanor on campus, referred to Julia Flisch as Duchess. She was known as the Duchess of campus, and it was sort of a title she held basically till the end of her life. And so it sort of epitomized her sort of standing in the community as well as her demeanor, and I think it was kind of a really fun, affectionate way of talking about her.
She wrote 2 books, years and years apart, one called Ashes of Hope in the 1880s, which was the frustrated efforts of some Georgia women to do something with their lives.
In 1930, she published Oh Hurricane, and the statement says that it received wide acclaim. But in this, she writes about a woman who marries a man who ends up being kind of passive, and it's the woman who stands up and really gets the land and takes charge of the land.
Julia Flisch gave total devotion to her teaching. Her intelligence was awe-inspiring, and she was a role model of practical activism for her students.
Her push came from her own personal desire for education, but she argued that the South was dependent on people that were educated in the North, and that should not be the way it was. That the South should be taking charge of its own economic development by educating architects and engineers and people that could do things practically.
When she died, this is an urban myth, but the story was that when they did an autopsy, they found that she had 2 brains because no woman could be that smart.
We've had the blessing to have a lot of faculty and administrators who've really kind of instilled the spirit of liberal arts on our campus, and Julia was one of the first ones to do that.